Jackie Kennedy's Christmas Style, a seasonal journey through the winter wardrobe of Camelot. You're watching Cultured Elegance. Make sure to like, subscribe, and become a channel member today. When Jacqueline Kennedy entered the White House in January of 1961, she entered a presidency defined as much by image as by policy. The early 1960s were the height of televised politics, photojournalism, and instantaneous public scrutiny. What the First Lady wore was no longer confined to society pages. It became a national and international visual language. Winter intensified that language. In warmer months, a First Lady could move between interiors and exteriors with relative ease. Dresses, short sleeves, and lighter fabrics allowed for flexibility, but winter narrowed the frame. Cold weather reduced the visible wardrobe to a smaller number of garments: coats, hats, gloves, worn repeatedly, photographed relentlessly, and remembered long after the events themselves had passed. December, in particular, was not a quiet month. The Christmas season at the White House brought formal receptions, religious observances, ceremonial appearances, tours, and diplomatic engagements. Many of these required Jacqueline Kennedy to appear outdoors before entering public spaces, often multiple times a day. Each arrival, each departure, each walk across a cold pavement became an image captured and circulated. This meant that winter clothing carried disproportionate weight. A single coat might represent her public presence for weeks at a time. A hat might appear in dozens of photographs taken from different angles, under different lighting conditions, and in different contexts: civic, religious, and ceremonial. Errors in winter dressing were not easily corrected. They repeated. Jacqueline Kennedy understood this reality from the beginning. Her Christmas season wardrobe was never about novelty or festivity in the modern sense. It was about control, of silhouette, of proportion, of message. This discipline was shaped by multiple pressures operating at once. There was the pressure of diplomacy. The First Lady was frequently seen alongside foreign dignitaries during December visits and receptions. There was the pressure of religion. Christmas was not only cultural, but deeply tied to faith and propriety. And there was the pressure of the press, cameras that captured still images meant to stand for an entire administration. In this environment, fashion ceased to be a personal expression. It became architecture. Winter garments had to convey stability without rigidity, elegance without excess, and modernity without spectacle. They had to function across settings, outdoors and indoors, sacred and civic, without visible adjustment or disruption. This is why Jacqueline Kennedy's Christmas style cannot be reduced to a single outfit, a single photograph, or even a single year. It was a seasonal system developed and refined under intense observation and executed with remarkable consistency between 1961 and 1963. Before we examine individual garments, designers, or accessories, it is essential to understand this foundational truth. Winter was not a backdrop to Jackie Kennedy's public life. It was one of its most demanding stages, and nowhere was that pressure more visible than in the garment that came to define her winter presence entirely. December in Washington, the coat becomes the outfit. By the winter of 1961, Jacqueline Kennedy's most important garment was no longer the dress beneath. It was the coat worn over it. This was not a matter of taste alone. It was a matter of reality. December in Washington, D.C. meant cold sidewalks, outdoor arrivals, and constant photography. In many cases, the public never saw what the First Lady wore underneath. What they saw, again and again, was the coat. This is where Oleg Cassini entered decisively into the story. Cassini was appointed Jacqueline Kennedy's primary designer shortly before the inauguration, and he approached winter clothing with an understanding few designers possessed at the time. Outerwear was not secondary fashion, it was the message itself. Cassini later explained that his task was to design clothes that would read instantly. In winter, that meant garments that could be understood from a distance, in motion, and under unforgiving flash photography. One of the most documented examples of this philosophy is the white wool inaugural coat, worn on January 20th, 1961. Although technically an inauguration garment, it set the visual language for every winter that followed. The coat was structured, collarless, and deliberately free of surface decoration. Its clean geometry allowed Jackie's posture, hair, and composure to remain the focal point. This was not accidental. Cassini designed winter coats with architectural restraint, smooth fronts, concealed fastenings, and minimal seaming, because busy details distorted under winter lighting and heavy fabrics. Throughout December, public appearances during the White House years, Jackie was repeatedly photographed in tailored wool coats in pale neutrals, soft pastels, and restrained solids. These coats were often cut in straight or gently A-line silhouettes, allowing ease of movement while maintaining a disciplined profile. Importantly, Cassini designed many of these coats to be more expensive and more carefully engineered than the dresses beneath them. In his view, winter coats needed to withstand scrutiny longer than any other garment. They were worn for hours, sometimes days, and photographed repeatedly from every angle. Buttons were often fabric-covered, collars were simplified or eliminated, sleeves were cut to allow gloves to remain visible, a deliberate choice that maintained visual proportion. What Cassini achieved was consistency, a visual language so controlled that even when colors shifted or fabrics changed, the message remained the same: calm authority, refinement, and continuity. And once this foundation was set, every other winter accessory, hats, gloves, sunglasses, could function in harmony rather than competition. With the coat established as her primary canvas, every other element of her winter wardrobe had to follow a strict set of rules: gloves, hats, and the rules of public respectability. By the early 1960s, Jacqueline Kennedy was operating within a set of social rules that are often forgotten today. Winter accessories were not optional expressions of style. They were markers of respectability, especially for a First Lady appearing in public during the Christmas season. Gloves, in particular, carried meaning. In mid-century America, a woman's bare hands in formal or semi-formal public settings could signal informality, haste, or disregard for protocol. For a First Lady, especially during December appearances that involved greetings, ceremonies, and receiving lines, gloves were a requirement of decorum. Jackie understood this precisely. Photographs from winter public events during the Kennedy White House years show her consistently wearing wrist-length or elbow-length gloves, even when weather conditions alone would not have demanded them. Gloves extended the line of the arm, prevented distraction during handshakes, and ensured that jewelry, if worn at all, remained understated. In many cases, gloves replaced bracelets entirely. Hats functioned in a similar way. The pillbox hat, which became closely associated with Jackie, was not a novelty or a trend piece. It was a solution. In winter, hair was vulnerable to wind, cold, and humidity, all enemies of composure under constant photography. The pillbox allowed her hair to remain controlled without obscuring her face or creating shadows in photographs. Equally important, the pillbox hat aligned precisely with period etiquette. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, women were not expected to remove hats indoors at formal or ceremonial events, in the way modern audiences often assume. A hat was considered part of a woman's complete public ensemble, not outerwear to be taken off like a coat. This mattered especially during the Christmas season, when appearances often combined church attendance, civic ceremony, and public visibility. In Catholic tradition, women customarily kept their hats on indoors during Mass. Head coverings signaled reverence and modesty, not informality. The same standards applied to official functions and formal receptions, where hats worn indoors communicated propriety and social awareness. Etiquette was situational. Women typically removed hats in private homes or informal settings, but kept them on at churches, ceremonial events, and public appearances. Jacqueline Kennedy's pillbox fit this formal category perfectly. Its small, unobtrusive shape framed the face, did not block sightlines, and functioned comfortably indoors. At Christmas, when protocol, religion, and ceremony converged, the pillbox was not a fashion gesture. It was the correct choice. Her winter hats were typically free of decoration. No feathers, no veils, no seasonal embellishments. This was intentional. Decorative hats competed with the face and distracted from the formality of the occasion. Jackie's hats framed rather than announced. Together, gloves and hats created what might be called her winter code of conduct. They enforced boundaries between public and private space. They maintained consistency across multiple appearances in a single day, and they ensured that her presence communicated steadiness, an especially valuable quality during a season crowded with symbolism, ritual, and expectation. And when faith entered the calendar, those same rules of discipline took on an even deeper meaning. Christmas faith and church dressing. For Jacqueline Kennedy, Christmas was not simply a social season, it was a religious one. As a practicing Catholic, she approached the Christmas period with a seriousness shaped by liturgical tradition, not spectacle. This distinction mattered deeply in how she dressed, particularly for church services during Advent and Christmas. In the early 1960s, attending Mass was not a casual activity, especially for a First Lady. Church appearances during the Christmas season were public, photographed, and symbolically charged. Clothing needed to reflect reverence, restraint, and respect for religious space. This imposed a different set of requirements than political or diplomatic dressing. Necklines were modest, hemlines were conservative, fabrics were substantial but subdued. Jackie's church ensembles during the winter months emphasized quiet formality rather than fashion innovation. Photographic records from the period show her arriving at church services in structured wool coats, often darker or more muted than her daytime public coats. Gloves were worn continuously, not removed upon entering, consistent with Catholic Church etiquette of the time. Hats remained in place indoors, another period convention that signaled decorum rather than disregard. Importantly, these choices were not seasonal ornamentation. There was no overt holiday styling, no sparkle, no novelty, no festive embellishment. The Christmas season called for visual humility, not celebration through dress. This restraint also reflected Jackie's understanding of visibility. Church was one of the few public spaces where silence, stillness, and solemnity were central. Her clothing needed to recede, allowing the act of worship, not the wearer, to remain the focus. Color choices reinforced this intention. Winter church outfits favored deep neutrals, softened tones, or restrained monochrome palettes. Jewelry, if present at all, was minimal, often limited to pearls already established as part of her public uniform. What distinguished these Christmas church looks from other winter appearances was not their construction, but their absence of emphasis. Every element, coat, hat, gloves, handbag, worked together to create continuity without calling attention to itself. This was elegance defined by submission to context. Church dressing represented a deliberate pause, a reminder that not every public appearance was an opportunity for expression. Some were obligations of faith, tradition, and respect. Jackie Kennedy understood that distinction instinctively. If church required humility, the White House required something different entirely, elegance that welcomed others without placing the spotlight on the hostess herself. White House Christmas. Entertaining, fashion without excess. Christmas entertaining at the White House during the early 1960s followed rules very different from those of private holiday celebrations. These were not balls, and they were not intimate dinners. They were structured receptions, diplomatic, ceremonial, and symbolic, often held across several days in December. Jacqueline Kennedy understood that her role during these events was not to perform, but to host. This distinction shaped how she dressed. White House Christmas receptions required clothing that balanced formality with approachability. The First Lady was expected to greet guests continuously, move easily through crowded rooms, and remain composed for long stretches of time. Clothing that demanded attention, adjustment, or visual dominance would have undermined that role. As a result, Jackie's holiday entertaining wardrobe emphasized containment rather than display. Evening dresses worn during the Christmas season were typically simple in line and construction. They favored clean silhouettes and fabrics that held their shape. Instead of elaborate embellishment, the interest lay in proportion and finish. Wraps and stoles played an important role. December receptions required warmth without bulk, and these layers allowed Jackie to transition between rooms without altering the integrity of the outfit. Jewelry was deliberately minimal. Heavy sparkle would have competed with the visual richness of the White House interiors. Jackie's approach ensured that the environment carried the festive weight, not her clothing. As hostess, she needed to recede slightly so that guests, diplomats, military families, artists, and civic leaders felt acknowledged rather than overshadowed. Her clothing provided a stable visual presence, one that reinforced hospitality rather than hierarchy. Importantly, this approach distinguished White House Christmas fashion from contemporary society dressing. In an era when holiday glamour often leaned toward excess, Jackie stood out precisely because she refused spectacle. There was also an institutional consideration. Christmas at the White House was not a private celebration. It was a national one. Her wardrobe had to honor the presidency itself, timeless, dignified, and appropriate for historical record. Jackie Kennedy's Christmas entertaining style was not about celebration through clothing. It was about creating a setting in which others could feel celebrated. Yet once, and only once, she allowed winter fashion to speak more loudly than usual. The leopard coat controlled boldness. Among Jacqueline Kennedy's winter wardrobe, there is one garment that stands apart, not because it defined her style, but because it departed from it: the leopard print coat. Designed by Oleg Cassini during her White House years, the coat appeared during the winter of 1962 and was quickly noted by the press. In a wardrobe otherwise dominated by solid colors, restrained silhouettes, and deliberate understatement, the presence of a bold animal pattern was unmistakable. Its impact lay in its rarity. This was not a holiday costume, nor was it worn as seasonal ornamentation. It was winter outerwear, functional, warm, and tailored, but visually assertive in a way Jackie's clothing almost never was. Because her public image had been built on discipline and consistency, the coat registered immediately as an exception. Cassini understood precisely how to use such an exception. The leopard coat was cut with the same structural restraint as her other winter garments. Its silhouette remained controlled. Its length, proportion, and fit adhered to the same principles governing her plain wool coats. There was no excess in construction, only in surface pattern. That distinction mattered. The coat did not signal a shift in taste or a rejection of her established style. It demonstrated that boldness, when tightly contained, could exist within a disciplined system without destabilizing it. Jackie did not follow the leopard coat with a series of patterned winter garments. She did not adopt prints as part of her Christmas or winter wardrobe. The coat remained singular, a calculated deviation rather than a new direction. Its role in her winter-style history is therefore specific and limited. It illustrates how carefully her public image was managed, and how rare departures from that image were deployed with intention. But for most winter days, consistency mattered far more than distinction, especially when movement and visibility could not be avoided. Travel season, airports, cameras, and the winter uniform. If winter demanded discipline, travel demanded consistency. During the Kennedy White House years, Jacqueline Kennedy was photographed more often in transit than in any other single context. Airports, arrival staircases, motorcades, and tarmacs became unavoidable stages, especially during the Christmas season, when travel between Washington and Palm Beach intensified. These moments allowed for no control. Lighting was harsh, weather unpredictable, timing compressed. Photographs were taken quickly, often without warning, and distributed widely. Under those conditions, visual variety became a liability. Jackie responded by developing a winter travel uniform, deliberately repetitive and therefore effective. It consisted of a tailored coat, gloves, a structured handbag, and at times sunglasses. Each element served a purpose. The coat established continuity. Gloves preserved formality during brief greetings. Sunglasses shielded her eyes from flashbulbs and offered a controlled boundary between public exposure and private fatigue. The handbag anchored proportion and steadied the silhouette. In transit, Jackie did not need to signal occasion or individuality. She needed to appear composed, unhurried, and unaffected by movement. The uniform allowed her to step off a plane, acknowledge the press, and proceed without adjustment. Unlike ceremonial clothing, which carried symbolic meaning, travel clothing was designed to recede. Its success lay in its neutrality. Designers working with her understood that travel garments required a different discipline. Fabrics had to resist creasing. Cuts needed to hold shape while seated. Colors had to read clearly in both daylight and artificial light. The result was a wardrobe that appeared nearly interchangeable from one journey to the next, an unusual choice in fashion, but a necessary one in public life. This consistency marked transition rather than display. It signaled movement between roles, spaces, and obligations without disruption. During the Christmas season, when travel itself became part of the public narrative, this uniform allowed Jacqueline Kennedy to remain visually stable amid constant motion. It was never intended to be memorable, and that is precisely why it worked. Palm Beach Christmases, winter style in a softer climate. When the Kennedy family spent Christmas in Palm Beach, the climate changed, but Jacqueline Kennedy's approach to dressing did not. Palm Beach offered warmth, sunlight, and a slower rhythm than Washington in December, yet it remained a public setting. The so-called Winter White House was not a retreat from visibility. It was simply a different stage. The heavy wool coats and layered winter accessories required in Washington gave way to lighter fabrics and reduced layering, but the underlying principles remained intact. Silhouettes stayed controlled. Color choices remained deliberate. Nothing suggested informality in the modern sense. Winter outfits worn in Palm Beach during the Christmas season favored clean lines and simple construction, often paired with light outer layers rather than substantial ones. These garments accommodated the climate while maintaining the visual order she required in public. Palm Beach was a place associated with wealth, leisure, and seasonal society. Yet Jackie avoided the flamboyance often expected of resort dressing. Even in warmth, her clothing maintained a sense of boundary. Holiday gatherings in Palm Beach were smaller and more familial than White House receptions, but they still carried weight. Photographs taken during these periods circulated widely, reinforcing the image of the First Lady beyond Washington. Jackie's wardrobe needed to communicate continuity, that the standards governing her public appearance did not relax with geography. Color palettes softened in Palm Beach light, but they did not become playful. Reds, pastels, and neutrals replaced darker winter tones, allowing the clothing to respond to sunlight without sacrificing seriousness. The effect was seasonal adaptation, not stylistic shift. Palm Beach Christmases therefore reveal something essential about Jackie Kennedy's fashion philosophy. Elegance for her was not tied to temperature or location. It was a system of decisions, proportion, and consistency that could be applied equally to cold sidewalks in Washington or warm terraces in Florida. The setting changed. The season remained the same, and the discipline held. What ultimately made this winter wardrobe endure, however, was not any single garment, but the visual logic that shaped them all, design intelligence, and a lasting visual legacy. What ultimately gave Jacqueline Kennedy's winter and Christmas wardrobe its lasting power was not repetition, but design intelligence. This clarity was shaped by her collaboration with Oleg Cassini, who approached the First Lady's clothing as a visual system rather than seasonal fashion. Cassini understood a central reality of the early 1960s. Jacqueline Kennedy would be seen far more often in photographs than in person. Her image was reproduced endlessly in newspapers, magazines, wire services, and official archives, often printed quickly and on low-quality paper. Clothing had to survive that process. This shaped every winter garment. Cassini favored clean surfaces, strong silhouettes, and uninterrupted lines because they translated clearly under flash photography and coarse printing. Decorative complexity that appeared elegant in person often collapsed in reproduction. Jackie shared this awareness. Together they designed clothing that remained legible no matter how often it was copied, cropped, or reduced. Her Christmas season wardrobe was not meant to impress in a single moment. It was meant to accumulate meaning over time. Coats, hats, and gowns reinforced one another across repeated appearances, creating a coherent public image that required no explanation. Cassini later said his goal was to make Jacqueline Kennedy look inevitable, as though the clothes could belong to no one else and no other moment. Winter, with its limited wardrobe and constant public exposure, became the ultimate test of that idea. Decades later, images from her Christmas seasons still endure, not because they capture a trend, but because they reflect deliberate design aligned with history, architecture, and ritual. Especially at Christmas time, Jacqueline Kennedy achieved something rare, a style that honored ceremony without overwhelming it, and a public image that remains clear, coherent, and complete. Thank you so much for watching this Cultured Elegance documentary. To support this channel, please subscribe, comment, and become a channel member today to have access to exclusive benefits. If you love the Kennedys and timeless history, you can continue watching with my curated playlists. I also have a free weekly newsletter where we explore elegance, culture, and history together. If you'd like to join, the link is in the description. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.